Hi everybody, it's me, the Fetch, host of Inside the Eye Live. Before the Sunday mainstream media political pundit talk shows, there is Inside the Eye Live, where we break down some of the weekly mainstream media talking points before the talking points even get aired. Add in some entertaining stories, weather, cats, intriguing and informative guests, and you get one of the most listened to Saturday morning streaming media political talk shows going today. And it's all right here on our flagship station, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. So join me, the Fetch, for Inside the Eye Live every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern. It is truly intelligent media for the politically aware.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lesson and Dr. Sasha Lesson.
Together we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lesson.
Aloha everyone, and welcome to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And I'm your host, Janet Kira Lesson, with your co-host, our co-host, Dr. Sasha Lesson, who owns that man? No one. And today we have Andrew-d-Basiago. And I'm going to read a little bit about Andrew. And he is a candidate for the United States presidency, but Andrew-d-Basiago is one man in the name of truth. He is a prominent figure in the truth movement. For more than 10 years, he has shared with the American people the true facts of our great nation's accomplishments in time travel and Mars visitation. He has done so as the one who served bravely in the two secret U.S. defense projects in which time travel on Earth and voyages to Mars were first undertaken. As a result of his courageous advocacy as a crusading lawyer, Andy is credited with ending the time travel and Mars cover-ups by the U.S. government on behalf of the American people. This arduous work in the vineyards of the truth movement represented historic breakthroughs in America's understanding of our past and our prospects for the future. Today, Andrew-d-Basiago is running for the President of the United States with a new agenda for a new America. He has vowed that if elected president, he will lead the American people into a bold new era of truth, reform, and innovation as great as they are great. So join us as we support Andy in his quest to establish a presidency as honest, just, and ingenious as the American people. Dr. Lesson, what would you like to say?
Today we're going to especially look at 17 of Andy Basiago's 100 principles of his platform. This is truly a very, very powerful aspect. The truth is our way of really getting to justice. And when you listen to what Andy's going to tell you the truth about and what kind of justice will result, you'll know this is the person to write in for President of the United States.
Right. And yesterday we went, or I didn't go, but Sasha went to the caucus here in Hawaii. And, of course, Bernie took the whole thing, but couldn't get in. There was a line wrapped around the building, and so he just ended up leaving. You had to go between 12 and 1. You had to be there between 12 and 1. All these people, masses of humanity. Anyway, let's bring in Andy and tell us a little bit about what's going on with this political situation as we come around the home stretch towards the elections.
Yeah, hi Janet, hi Sasha. It's very interesting. We're definitely leading into a very unusual election in 2016. The Republican Party is on its way, at least the rank and file is on its way to nominating Donald Trump as the Republican nominee, but the Republican leadership opposes Trump. They have had Mitt Romney begin doing campaign appearances. including a California campaign stop that he did about 10 days ago, with a view to introducing a spoiler into the race if Trump is nominated, which could very well happen at the Republican convention. So what I'm saying here is that the power brokers within the Republican Party do not want Trump to be the nominee of the Republican Party, but if he becomes that, they're going to introduce a spoiler, perhaps Mitt Romney, perhaps someone else that they would recruit. The goal there would be to throw the general election in November into the House of Representatives, which has not happened since 1824. One of our greatest presidents, in fact, one of my favorite presidents, and I think a relatively unheralded president relative to his character and his service to our country, John Quincy Adams received only 26% of the vote in 1824. But as a result of the split that threw the general election into the House, as per the terms that provide for that in the Constitution, in modern times that would involve the winning candidate not receiving 270 electoral votes in the Electoral College. The vote is thrown into a general vote on a state basis in the House. And John Quincy Adams won that vote in the House because he had such respect among his colleagues in government. So that's where the Republican Party is as of today. They are essentially expecting that Trump will win. The power brokers oppose Trump. They believe that he's disruptive and an embarrassment to the party, and that he would truly lead rather than implement their design for the country. On the Democratic side, we have a split basically between the moderate faction of the Democratic Party, what I like to call Republican light, and what I like to call the true Democrats, and those would be the Democrats supporting a true leftist, namely Bernie Sanders. Hillary Clinton has the support of all of the corporations that support the Democratic Party, just as her husband, America's leading unregistered sex offender, Bill Clinton, had the support of those corporations. Bernie Sanders received unilateral support from the unions. And the breakdown there monetarily for the two leading Democratic candidates is that Hillary received about 10 times as much money from every corporation that has supported her as Bernie Sanders received from the unions. So, I look at Bernie Sanders, and he's clearly the candidate that I would be supporting if I was not running myself. But I really think that a study of his candidacy reveals the paucity of vision that now exists in politics. I mean, Bernie Sanders is a very good man. I believe that he's sincere when he says that he views himself as a democratic socialist. He was way out in the political wilderness for years, running even for the United States Senate as a socialist. He was the only socialist in the Senate, in recent times at least, and was elected by one of our most liberal states as a socialist to both the House and then the Senate after serving as the mayor of Burlington, Vermont. And I think he's a true leftist, but his platform is entirely a reactive platform based on class warfare and the politics of resentment and of essentially leftist reactionaryism. In other words, he's not providing the American people a vision of the future. He's basically saying, vote for me and I'll get in. And I'll right all these wrongs that have been waged against ordinary people by the wealthy and the corporations. Now, that's deserved right now. I have many provisions like that in my 100 proposals that we're going to discuss tonight. And I believe that that's legitimate. I believe that I would be supporting Bernie were I not running. But my point here is that that does not embody a fully fledged platform by which to lead the country. I mean, we're 16 years into the 21st century, and I dare say I'm the first American political leader to have offered a vision of where the president could take the country in light of the opportunities and challenges of the 21st century. So that's what I think is missing in Bernie's, for all of his appeal, what I think is missing in his campaign. Also I must say that as a second wave boomer, Strauss and Howe placed the baby boom as stretching between birth years 1943 and 1961. So, Bernie is in a sense a trailing edge silent. He was born 20 years before I in 1941, actually in September as well. He was born on September 8th of 1941. I was born on September 18th of 1961. So in a sense, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders represent, I hate to say this, it's kind of cruel, but almost the last hurrah for the baby boomers. We've already had a president born in August of 1961, Barack Obama, and we find that the two potential standard bearers of the Democratic Party are pushing 70. Donald Trump is going to be 70 this year. So I think what I represent is a new generation of leadership. I come in as not so much a trailing edge boomer, but I would assert as a leading edge indigo, having been born in 1961. And I've been paying attention all these 54 years, and I think in my 100 proposals I have a plan for the country that is as concretized and specific and visionary as John F. Kennedy's was in 1960. I'm very happy with my 100 proposals, a new agenda for a new America, and the reception to them has been literally off the chart. I can share some of those responses with you, but
I'd love to hear that. Yes.
Well, they've been called awesome, brilliant, unparalleled, genius in print. One commentator in an essay in a leading left-leaning political journal even said, reading the proposals themselves is a life experience. So I couldn't be happier with the hiatus I went into from roughly early February of this year to early March, where I simply just hung out and knocked those things out with very little reference. They pretty much just came right from things that had been on my mind for years. In other words, I didn't go in search of what I wanted to represent. I knew what I wanted to embody in my campaign, and it was one of those intuitive writing experiences where they just came out almost fully fledged. And there are 100. There are 17 in the area of truth, 53 proposals in the area of reform, and 30 proposals in the area of innovation. So we had talked about how tonight we're going to take a look at the 17 truth proposals.
I'd just like to observe that one of the big differences that I see between what Hillary, Donald, and Bernie all have, and what you have, is that they are still based on the Drudge Labor, that your platform will actually free us from things that artificial intelligence and the sharing of the technology that your candidacy implies would do away with the need to do these jobs which perpetuate the economic slavery of most of the population.
Right. They're really stuck, just as our technology is, Dr. Lesson, in the 70s. I mean, Bernie Sanders is offering the committed left's response to corporate finance that we've heard since the 1960s, but he doesn't even get into the area, for example, that we're going to have to get into as a society, which is the fact that automation eliminates jobs and doesn't replace them. So we have two choices now. We can either choose to create a permanent underclass of permanently unemployed and underemployed individuals just scraping by, maybe with the benefit of not starving to death in America because of food stamps, but shifting for pocket change. Or we can basically establish a guaranteed minimal income. Bernie Sanders doesn't even propose. Bernie Sanders doesn't even propose mandatory employee stock ownership for companies over a larger size, and I have to ask myself why. Essentially, what he wants to do, as a committed leftist critic of corporate capitalism, of finance capitalism, is soak the rich. And not only does a tax plan based on soaking the rich galvanize the right, and that right is now thoroughly galvanized by having captured the House of Representatives, which stymies all left-leaning legislation. But it's fundamentally not fair because only 50% of wealth is inherited. The other 50% is being made by people who are selling records, curing diseases, handling complex litigation, etc. In other words, America is still a land where ordinary people are doing remarkable things. Look at what I've done in my career. I'm just Andy-Basiago from Morris Plains, New Jersey. And I've been doing remarkable things in my career. So I just don't buy the politics of resentment and of class warfare. It doesn't work. That's why I'm advancing the one tax. Rather than saying, okay, let's soak the rich, let's create a scientific form of taxation that does not offend the conservative devotion to laissez-faire on the right, nor the liberal regard for tax and spend on the left. Let's create a form of taxation that raises necessary revenues to run federal and state government, to do, as Abraham Lincoln said, the things collectively that people cannot do individually. But in terms of finding a scientific way of doing that, I'm proposing that we establish a bank withdrawal tax, because there's trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of payrolls that are paid, of corporations withdrawing money to make capital expenditures on their operations, of everyday people withdrawing money from the ready teller. Maybe somebody withdraws $200 to take several of their colleagues, maybe six or seven of their colleagues to lunch for sushi or something. So I'm proposing that every time somebody withdraws money from a bank, which is the point in the economy where, in the words of the economist, the Cambridge economist, the person is internalizing their net benefit, where they're being most selfish in the economy by internalizing the net benefit of economic activity, that we impose anywhere from a 0.5 percentile to a 5% tax. And there's so much activity running through the banks constantly. Even every time somebody writes a check, that's a bank withdrawal. That we would be able to eliminate all other forms of taxation and impose that single tax, and be able to split that fisc in half between the federal government and the states on a populational basis. So, for example, a state like California would get a much larger drawdown of the half that would go to the states than a relatively low population state like, let's say, South Dakota. And we've already run the numbers. There's enough money running through the banking system all day long. So we would all be freed of the kinds of taxes that are economic inhibitors, like the income tax. The income tax penalizes people for the amount of money they make every year. The sales tax inhibits consumption. And consumption is the essence, the delivery of goods and services is the essence of a thriving economy. And also, unlike all of the flat taxes that have been proposed on the right by individuals like Steve Forbes, Ross Perot was thinking of one, the difference with a bank withdrawal tax is the amount of money that would be taxed would grow in proportion to the size of the bank withdrawal. So the corporations and the wealthy would pay a lot more every year as a result of the bank withdrawal tax, because they're moving larger sums of capital around all the time via bank withdrawal and redeposit or investment or payment to somebody or what have you. So unlike a flat tax, mine is a tax that can be readily sustained by the taxpayer, but it is not regressive. It doesn't penalize the high school student pulling money out to buy lunch. It is scaled to the size of the withdrawal, and therefore is an equitable tax. Okay, so that's what we're not finding in Bernie's left-leaning politics. We're finding a lot of class warfare. He's constantly referencing, for example, where he talks about how we saved the banks. In his comments about how we saved the banks following the mortgage debacle of 2008, this sort of new depression that we've been in, what you see is resentment that we saved the banks. But in fact, the banks have been paying back the money we lent them. And what Obama achieved was actually one of the accomplishments of his presidency, which is during this period where the mortgage debacle could have caused a bank run and a collapse of our banking system, such as we experienced during the Great Depression, which really compounded the economic panic of 1929. Obama saved the banks by taking federal money and propping up the too big to fail banks, the banks that the futurist Gerald Celente bemoans. But you know something? That was a smart thing to do. It was the right thing to do. The banks have been paying us back. I think several of the biggest banks are now 80% larger than they were in 2008, which means that we have more money available now for savings and investment, and our financial system is more sound. So that wasn't public largesse. We were paid back by that, and we used federal funds creatively to prevent an economic meltdown. So that was actually one of the successes of the Obama years.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question on that one. What would you do to the people that are still facing foreclosure, which dates back to the collapse of 2008?
Well, I'm much farther to the left on economic matters than Obama is. Had I been Obama, or if I'm elected in 2016 or 2020, what I will do with foreclosure is I will use eminent domain to buy up the houses that have been foreclosed. The United States government did that in the Great Depression. It then let those houses out again under 3% mortgages that individuals with jobs were capable of paying. And it both soaked up the inventory of foreclosed properties, so it supported property values, which is the primary investment for American citizens, is their home, especially in light of the tax advantages of writing off your mortgage payment on your federal income taxes. And so I would save that primary investment of the American people. I would prop up property values, which is a good thing. I mean, immigration sustains property values, right? Okay. And I would let them out as mortgages that would be held not by parasitical and predatory financial institutions, but the American people would be the mortgage holder, and would be letting.
What about the people that were forced out of their homes?
They would have the opportunity to purchase new homes or purchase their home back if it's still in one of the REO pools of a bank, and be able, under a federal program, almost like, it would be a federal mortgage program at 3%. It would be like the mortgage version of a Pell Grant. In education, you would say owning a home is a good thing. Let's get as many people as possible into their own homes rather than losing their money every month renting. I found one of the other candidates in the race, Governor Pataki, and his friend, the late Richard Hayden of Portland, Oregon, a $100 million line of credit to do that, to do white hat lending at affordable rates during the mortgage meltdown. On February 20th of 2009, after contacting 100 private money sources, I raised a $98 million line of credit that was not used to buy homes out of the REO pools of major banks so that people could start getting back into their own properties. So when we did that during the Great Depression, the federal government made money. Would we make money again? Yes. Why? Because we're at the beginning of a new economic cycle when property values are at their lowest. It's the best possible time to buy, not just on a contrarian basis, but on a common sense basis. The prices are lower than they've been in 20 years. So I was involved in that personally. I was looking for money from private money sources, and I found it for Rick Hayden and George Pataki. Pataki later left the deal, to be fair, but he was initially on the prospectus where we were trying to raise that line of credit. And I and two fellow brokers found a $100 million line of credit for an effort to get people back in their property. So I guess what I'm distinguishing there is that Bernie Sanders hates capitalism. I hate predatory capitalism. I'm a democratic capitalist. I believe in a combination of non-authoritarian government and the private ownership of property. Bernie is a socialist. He also believes in non-authoritarian government, but he espouses the public ownership of property. And I have to be frank here. At a time when Democrats are trying to take our guns away and Republicans are trying to take our money away because they basically just don't want us to share the money that they want to make, it is the worst possible time to espouse socialism and the governmental confiscation of wealth. We would be much safer now that we have Republicans trying to take our money away and Democrats trying to take our guns away, to have both our guns and our money. So now at the recharging of the economy, a time when we have the largest amount of unemployment, we've got something like 90 million unemployed, at the time when the food stamp rolls have swelled, when working blue collar and middle class families are barely making ends meet. They have no money left at the end of the month. It's the worst possible time to impose socialism, because you take what little remaining capital people have and their guns to defend themselves economically and situationally. And so I avowedly oppose the socialism of political figures like Bernie Sanders.
Wow. Do you have any questions? I have one if you don't. Okay. What's your ideas on what do we do about the homeless?
Okay. The thing that's strange about our society, and I think you can go back and see that American culture emerged out of a fairly Calvinistic Protestantism.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, there's a correlation between economic success. There's a perceived correlation between economic success and virtue. So when somebody hits rock bottom, what our states have been doing and the federal government has been doing, but primarily the states, because it's a state responsibility under the 10th Amendment, the Reserve Powers Clause, regarding defending the health, safety, and morals of the population, as it says to the homeless, we will find you shelter if you clean up your act. I believe, as a non-denominational Christian, as somebody who tries to live a Christic life and espouse the true gospel of Jesus Christ, that is unchristian. I believe that a person who has hit rock bottom and who is sleeping on the sidewalk, who has hit the pavement and has no shelter, which is a basic human right, as part of the common heritage of humankind, should be offered shelter first. Interestingly, one of our most conservative Republican states, largely Mormon state, the state of Utah, has introduced a plan to do just that. Instead of saying, well, come into drug interdiction and we'll give you a place to sleep, they're saying, here's an apartment. That's my plan to end homeless in America. The way to end permanent homelessness in America is to take the homeless off the street and say, listen, we're going to put you in a modest group home or apartment, and then we're going to take a look at the conditions that led to your homelessness. Was it chronic unemployment? Well, why have you been chronically unemployed? Do you have the skills to thrive? Are you suffering from alcoholism? Are you addicted to drugs? Do you come from a rotten social background where you only learned crime? Did you have a mental breakdown and were not able to care for yourself? How can we help you? But at the time that the person's helped, society would have already reached out to that individual, somebody at the lowest ends of the economic spectrum, and said, we are here to help you. Now, Ronald Reagan said that was the worst thing the government could say, right? I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. But that's what I believe a Christian society does. It says to the homeless, we shall give you shelter. I mean, my father was rescued one time in the Mexico desert when he was on an engineering project, because he had been drinking with the team on the project, and he made a wrong turn into the desert rather than to the hotel district near Monterey where they were working. And the first thing out of the words of the two young Mexicans who helped him was, we are Christians, we are here to help you. And that's what I believe we should say to the homeless. We should say, if you're homeless in America, the first thing that we focus on is your homelessness. We solve that, and then we begin the patriarchal process of intervening in your life in a substantive way, in a therapeutic way, and say, okay, let's see if we can cure your alcoholism. Let's see if we can get you off of drugs. Let's see if we can get you a job if you simply have been dislocated from the economy and have otherwise been living an unaffected life. Let's see when your mental breakdown occurred, what happened to you. You know, many of our homeless are veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. So in that example, we would say, okay, let's get you in an apartment, and then on Monday you're showing up for your counseling for your PTSD. But amazingly, despite the fact that America considers itself a Christian country, Utah was the first state to do that, and they did so very recently, just a year or two
It's actually cheaper for them to house them than to have them on the streets, because it's cost more in police and medical when they have
exactly.
to,
Exactly. Are we going to have a nation? Are we going to have a nation based on gladiation, where we shoot and beat up the homeless rather than just get them into a shelter? get them into shelter. It doesn't. I'm not talking about a homeless shelter. I'm talking about actual housing that's
Right,
respectable.
in Utah, they give them nice, respectable apartments, and they're very. I've seen the videos, and they're pretty nice. And then they have those tiny homes in other communities. At least they have shelter, and they have, their own place to sleep, and perhaps a bathroom. It's nice to have your own bathroom.
A
Right,
shower,
yeah.
a shower to clean up, to go for a job interview. And then you can, and also many of the jobless are just people who don't know how to apply for a job or write a resume. So some of the intervention on the chronically underemployed can be very straightforward. You get them a place to live, a shower to clean up, some clean clothes, and boom, you're getting them into a job interview by showing them how to apply, where to apply. All over the country there are jobs in grocery stores right now. Sometimes they have odd hours, but if somebody can show up because they have a place to sleep indoors, they can usually hold down one of those jobs. So that's what I believe we need to do. I believe we need to get away from that Calvinist notion that somebody's performance in the economy is some measure of their worth or their morality as a human being, and recognize that in a competitive corporate capitalist economy, people are going to fall through the safety net. They have. And they will until we rescue them from the streets.
From my understanding, like a basic minimum needs economy, and we're moving past a jobs-based society, but getting into contributionism. What can we contribute to the world without it necessarily being a job that we go work in McDonald's, when that's really beneath, our skill set of what we could contribute to the world? We might not be able to find a job based on, we're incredible artists, right? But we can't have a job, so we can't produce this art which would contribute to the world, or the music, or, it seems like having a jobs-based economy or a jobs-based society is kind of like a level zero civilization. And when we get more into the ideas and concepts of civilizations that have risen above that, it's more like, well, how can you contribute to the planet and feel good about yourself at the same time, rather than jobs are kind of like drudgery, slavery. And I have had lots of jobs in my life, and it was just like, how can I get out of this slavery?
I believe that we don't want to introduce contributionism in the sense of getting rid of money, because money is a very efficient way to distribute goods and services that are produced, including the artwork of talented artists and so forth. I would define contributionism as the notion that if we impose a bank withdrawal tax and use the tax system to create ongoing perpetual tax surpluses, we can then fund individual prosperity accounts that will redefine contributionism as a guaranteed monthly minimal income. And under that kind of society, there would be no obligation to work just to survive. As Buckminster Fuller said, the future will be one in which more and more people will choose not to, quote unquote, make a living, but to live and contribute what they creatively can, whether it's work or art. Now, that's going to be possible with the bank withdrawal tax. It's not going to be possible with contributionism defined as just getting rid of money, because the entire mechanism for the distribution of goods and services would then collapse. Okay, so I don't believe that money is the problem. The misallocation of money is the problem. And I don't believe people are impoverished because rich people exist. Because, in fact, in times of economic downturn, the poor get poorer, but the rich get poorer. And vice versa. In times of prosperity, the rich get richer and the poor get richer. So the problem isn't inherently money itself. It's the misallocation of money and the fact that what makes somebody poor is they have not been internalized in the system of ongoing net revenues. So, for example, you could take a homeless person, give them a shower and a fresh suit of clothes, and if you put them to work in a stock brokerage that paid a set fee just for being on the line, let's say $2,000 a month just for showing up at the stock brokerage, suddenly they would be in a position where they could internalize a portion, their drawdown from the net revenue flows of society. So it's not their morality, it's not the rich. The reason that people are poor is because they do not have an internalized interest in the system of prosperity, which is just the flow of money through society. So what you do is you establish a guaranteed minimal income. And as I said earlier in the show, that's going to be necessary. And the only American political leader of any renown, of any stature, who has stated that publicly, and I must commend him, is Governor Jerry Brown of California, one of our most visionary politicians. He has stated that, look, we're going to have to start thinking in terms of that guaranteed minimal income, just as 30 years ago, Australia began paying its young men to surf and drink beer all day because automation is eliminating jobs and not replacing them. So are we going to have a society that uses our surpluses, the abundance that capitalism is producing, that creativity is producing, to make some people very, very rich, so where they can't even distribute goods and services with their money because there's not enough money to go around? Or are we going to create a scientific, equitable redistribution of capital on a monthly basis so that the game always resets and everybody has enough money to provide for their life support? That's one of the crazy things about capitalism is it's a game, the playing pieces are money, but then we justify and we come up with all kinds of rationalizations for why we don't redistribute the playing pieces. I even have people say, well, why should the homeless get housing? I have to work 40 hours a week to pay for my housing. And I say to them, which would you prefer? To be making your $60,000 a year and renting your apartment, or be on the street asking for society's help just to have shelter? Okay, so we have to get beyond that Calvinistic bias of American society, that same society that's fundamentally prudish about sex, ashamed of its bodily functions and the noises that we make, is also one that remains committed to this perverse and spiritually thwarting Calvinist notion that a good person is a person who has succeeded at providing for themselves and is prosperous on behalf of the rest of society. That's where the whole gospel of wealth came from. That's the justification of corporate capitalism that Christianity has.
You go back a little bit, the idea, I think it was from Weber, that if you are rich, that means that God has particularly favored you, and if you fall out of your wealth, that means God's annoyed with you and you're getting what their deity wants you to get. And so that's this notion that's informing this pernicious system that we now have.
Yeah, well, that, of course, was Thurston Veblen as a social critic identifying the hypocrisy of the gospel of wealth. And he also gave us the term conspicuous consumption. And quite frankly, as a lawyer, I've served, I've been lawyer for everything from a 17-year-old who's just stolen a baby T-shirt from Kohl's who has no money, up to centimillionaires. I mean, I've represented the broad gamut of people financially in our society. And I think people in the middle and at the lower part of the income distribution stream don't really have a sense that one of the things that the wealthy actually buy with their money is conspicuous consumption. Look at the money people put in their automobiles. Rather than getting a serviceable new or used automobile and spending $10,000 or $20,000 on it, they'll spend $100,000 to demonstrate their wealth or their sex appeal or whatever in what automobile they drive. So, after a certain amount of attainment of wealth, a lot is just, okay, what can I give to charity? What toy can I play with? What car can I show off? Because, you can only sleep in one bed and, own so many houses until you're just basically a landlord and you're renting them, right? Okay, so this is something we have to move beyond. We have to move beyond the narcissistic impulses of modern corporate capitalism and say, wait a minute. Economic activity ultimately should be taking care of everybody in society, and I call those the 5 givens. The fact that it should be a given that everybody is entitled as a result of being a human being, as part of the common heritage of mankind, to food, shelter, education, healthcare, and employment if they want it. Why? Because we are ultimately one common species, each of us sharing 87% of the same genes. We're almost carbon copies of each other. Only 13% of our genetics makes us different than the next human being. But there is only one race, the human race. We are one species. We are occupying one planet, one spaceship Earth. And in the 21st century, what we're going to see emerge, especially with all of the indigos and the crystal kids coming along, is the notion that we are team members of one integrated spaceship. And therefore, we have to start provisioning our team members rather than viewing individual life support as a moral obligation that some people fail and should be punished for. Okay, you don't punish a team member. You might bench them if they're not performing, or you might give them additional coaching or training if they're not performing. But you don't cut somebody from the team when they're not performing, when the team is humanity itself. And so that's what I'm going to be promoting internationally before the UN, and I'm going to be, in the same way that Franklin Delano Roosevelt spoke of the 4 freedoms, I'm going to be speaking of the 5 givens, because the modern surplus-based form of capitalism that's emerging, that would be the highest use of that economy, is to say, okay, now let's do something we haven't done before. As Bruce Springsteen said, the great singer from my home state of New Jersey, who I'm going to appoint poet laureate, we don't win unless everybody wins. And that's going to become, I think, the new ethos of the United States of America, and we can spread that.
That can be your campaign song.
Absolutely. I don't know if it was one of his songs, but Bruce was right in so many ways. One of our more visionary artists was right. Yeah, Bruce was right. We don't win unless everybody wins. And in fact, that's now an ineluctable truism, in the sense that since the economy is perpetually creating surpluses, we either develop an economy based around the 5 givens, or we literally create this pernicious economy in which the rich get richer and richer and have nobody to share their wealth with because nobody has any money. That's already happening. In fact, the 2 individuals, Hayden and Pataki, that I was looking for that white hat money for, Rick took me to his house in Lake Oswego, Oregon, and said, Andy, we're in a crisis as a country. And I said, what is it, Rick? And he said, money is not being spread around a lot. You know, my company is worth $750 million, and I'm wondering whether I should. And I have X number of dollars. I have $200 million in discretionary income, and I'm not sure whether I should buy more real estate to manage in my apartment business. He was an owner of apartment complexes, because I'm pretty sure that those apartment complexes would decline in value. So the general public doesn't understand that during this crisis, when Obama saved the banks, the crisis was one in which the rich had no incentive to buy property. And so there really was a failure of capitalism. And that's going to continue to happen cyclically now that we have gone through the threshold of potential life support for everybody. So we're going to have to develop some kind of distributionist economy.
If you had a basic minimum income for everybody, they're not going to just sit on it. They're going to need to spend it to buy food and shelter and
exactly.
So it'll put all that money out back into circulation.
Exactly. As long as the people playing the game have the playing pieces, the game will continue. And that's what it is. If you use game theory, how can you play the game of capitalism without any playing pieces? Okay, so yes, they're going to spend it for food, for services, and if you think of the people who will, the fact that everybody will, let's say, be receiving a check in the mail, at least every adult, and maybe with some allocation of an extra $500 per child or something like that. If everybody was receiving, let's say, $2,000 a month in a check from the government, a Fed check, they're not just going to all be surfing, but if some young men and women are surfing, why not? Didn't we want to get to a world where some people could surf all day by developing the light bulb and the automobile and antibiotics, etc.? In other words, weren't the great titans of American industry and creativity trying to move us to a world without toil, into a world of at least enhanced leisure opportunity? So some people will choose to become park rangers. Some people will choose to do environmental cleanups with their friends. Some people will make music and give free concerts in the park. Some people will choose to go to their engineering company and make $100,000 a year plus the $24,000 they'll be making in their guaranteed minimal income. Many professionals will still choose to make what they've been making as professionals, as doctors, lawyers, and so forth, but also utilize their guaranteed minimal income to save it, to pay for their kids' college education, what have you. We're not going to have a country of sloth just because we've eliminated hunger and homelessness with a guaranteed minimal income. That's ridiculous. When we know from experience that when people are given the 5 givens, they flourish. It's the fed child. It's the fed child. It's the child with a meal in its belly that does well at school. Even a moderate Republican, Nelson Rockefeller of New York, knew that, and that's why he sponsored school lunches when he was governor of New York. Free school lunches. Okay, so we have to move away from the notion that capitalism is this vicious game of atomistic competition. It never should have been that, but now we have the opportunity to liberate ourselves from that model because the system itself has done so. We now have perpetual surpluses.
I love it. Okay, we've got about, I don't know, a little bit less than 15 minutes before the break at the top of the hour. Let's start with the 100 proposals.
The 17
There's
proposals
17 in the truth
concerning
category.
Right, I'm the truth candidate for president. I entered public life as a figure in the truth movement, primarily making the public aware of the fact that DARPA achieved time travel in the early 1970s, and by the early 1980s, the CIA was sending young Americans to Mars via jump room, an advanced quantum access technology. So a number of my proposals in the truth area relate to that. My first proposal is entitled Disclosing Secret Advanced Technologies. And in that one, I'm really responding to an issue that was the number one issue that the 2,000 awake and aware individuals who attended Contact in the Desert last summer told my pollsters who were going around questioning people, what are you most concerned about? Give us your number one issue. And the number one issue was the fact that the U.S. government is concealing advanced technologies that we could use to liberate the human race. Mm-hmm. So that's my first proposal. I would be...
Yeah, we're actually using technologies like our cars and planes. It's over 100 years old. We're in antiques.
There's some evidence...
Antique technology.
Exactly. Just as I like to use the James Taylor example. In my experience, every time I go into a family restaurant in America, like a Denny's or a Kara's or something, James Taylor is singing Fire and Rain. Okay. A hit that JT had in 1970, but they're never playing his 2009 cover of Walking My Baby Back Home, which just is incredible, and his latest stuff, which is better than ever. His voice is better than ever. We're always hearing the hits of 1970, 71, and 72, or maybe a little bit on the edge of that. Maybe they'll punch it out to like an Eagles hit from 1974 or 5, or a Fleetwood Mac hit from 1975 or 6. But the point I'm making there, kind of humorously, is that America's stuck in the 70s. Okay, we are driving 1970s automobiles. Our politics is stuck in the 70s. Our leading politicians came of age politically in the 70s. I mean, Hillary Clinton was a lawyer on the Watergate committee, on the Senate Watergate Committee, and was fired for unethical conduct in that position. Bernie Sanders has been crusading for socialism since he was a washed-up 40-year-old who hadn't really accomplished anything in his life. By the time I was 40, I had earned 6 degrees and served in 2 classified defense projects. And built a thriving law practice. Okay, so they're asking us, and what Donald Trump began his career as a real estate investor, basically by lying to investors in the state of New York, beginning in the 1970s. Okay, so we are stuck in the 70s. The leading candidates are stuck in the 70s. They have no vision, and they're not even discussing any of these 17 truth proposals that I'm making among my 100 proposals for 2016. And the leading one is, look, let's create a situation where the American government would be declassifying and deploying the hidden technologies that it's been keeping secret now for 70 years. They've done this. There's a term, and that is the notion of disruptive technology. They've been keeping technology secret because it would be socially, economically, or technically disruptive. I believe what the people have earned, what has been earned by the creativity of the American civilization, going back to Cotton Mather, right? Going back to the pre-founding period of the country. What has been earned is that the people that are now alive are owed, they have an entitlement to the best available technology. It is not, for example, ethical or moral for government to suppress teleportation technology so that Americans are spending hours stuck in traffic jams. You know, there was a traffic jam in China in 2010 on a 50-lane freeway. That's 50. That lasted for a week and that required a response by 150 Chinese policemen to rescue the people in their cars with food, water, blankets, etc., so they could sleep in their cars. That's the society that's going to emerge unless we pressure the United States government and elect a truth president to unleash these hidden technologies that the United States has sequestered, which we could use to literally lead the world in a Tesla-based energy revolution and technical revolution that would literally liberate the world from toil. We would have 7 billion people who would be able to do their thing every day and be maximally intelligent, maximally creative, maximally artistically, economically, and culturally and technologically creative by liberating people with the very technology that the United States is keeping secret.
I think that should be one of the givens. Transportation. That's a basic human right, transportation and communication.
Right,
that's just my thoughts.
That could be the 6 givens.
Mm-hmm.
But I was drafting those as sort of the minimum survival provision.
Right, minimum survival. But
what I like for number 7 is justice. Justice for women particularly.
Well, Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well,
and the other one is communication. We need to be able to communicate with each other. We're in a modern world, and I think they're doing it by giving phones to the elderly and that type of stuff. But if you don't have a way to communicate, you're cut off from the world right now.
Absolutely. So those are all human considerations that my other proposals address. I was just limiting the 5 givens to things that, when deprived, cause people's lives to fall apart.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they were sort of the most poignant and urgent things that human beings require just to survive, not thrive. But I do agree with your surmise that those are things that are also basic human needs that I try to address in my other proposals.
Excellent. So bring on the teleportation. I'm about to schedule a trip to Toronto from Maui, and it's just going to be an incredible journey, like 14, 15 hours and a lot of money. And it's just, once you become a senior citizen and you're on this fixed income.
Well, how fast does teleportation?
Yeah, let's get
how
this
does it
going,
work?
Andy.
How fast do you go?
Well, when I was on Project Pegasus as a child, we were going from Woodridge, New Jersey, to the Santa Fe State Capitol Grounds, the New Mexico State Capitol Grounds in Santa Fe, in several seconds. Wow. So that's the irony of teleportation, is at the time that, let's say, Al Gore was studying the greenhouse effect in Professor Roger Revell's greenhouse seminar at Harvard College in 1970, within the secret reaches of the United States Defense Department, a small, obscure DARPA program had developed the means to obviate 60% of the emissions of greenhouse gases that come from conventional transport every year. So we could have been living in such a world for the last 46 years, where you could go from London, England to Sydney, Australia in several seconds rather than 24 hours on an airplane. So
you could meet your friend for lunch and go home afterwards. It's
I like to say that,
world.
What kind of world could it be? It could be a world in which high school seniors in Newport Beach, California, have their high school prom in Paris and teleport home before midnight.
Mm-hmm.
When you travel that way, do you bend space-time?
Yes, you're opening up a vortal tunnel by using inertia, either the inertia of the human body or these containment vessels that would be made of Kevlar that I'm describing, the VORTs. That's an acronym for Vehicle of Recumbent Teleportation. You'd be sitting or laying inside this plasticized vessel that would be thrust through the field of radiant energy, just as we were jumping through that field of energy when I was a child in Project Pegasus. So we could have been living in a world of teleportation-based transport by 1970-71, and instead the Defense Department decided to keep that technology secret as a military weapon.
Are there any side effects from teleporting?
Well, the teleportation that we did 45 years ago caused heart valve defects in the adult teleportees and later adult onset of a diabetes-like syndrome in the child teleportees. But that was 45 years ago. In fact, I'm always sure to comment on the fact that I was taking different medications with which they were experimenting to reduce the profound dehydration that the teleportation created. I think in the case of the adult teleportees, there were vibrational effects and frequencies of the teleportation that were causing the heart tissue to fuse. My father, for example, had a fused mitral valve that probably resulted from his teleporting. I developed a disease that mimics diabetes about 10 years ago that a lot of the adults who were the child teleportees have been developing. But there's been 45 years of hidden, technical development in which probably teleportation has been made safe, because almost without question it's been used to move our president, the vice president, and different other executive branch officials around the world in a time-urgent way. And so I believe it's been made medically safe. If it hasn't been made medically safe, I don't support releasing it for the general public, but I do support using it to ship goods nationally and internationally, because if we get those 22-wheelers off the freeways, we're going to save a lot of lives and really free up the congestion on our major arterials. So that's something that I will only know after I'm elected and I can open up the teleportation files.
All right, well, that's our break. We'll be back in just 3 minutes. See you soon.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Tune in Tuesdays at 12 noon Eastern on Studio A to hear Tammy Adams share her knowledge of an unknown realm on Talking with Your Angels. Join Tammy as she uncovers hidden secrets about the spiritual world of angels, ghosts, and other entities that have been with us longer than we know. Tammy is a psychic, a teacher, spiritual coach, a leader in her field, and will be sharing her information and stories with you. So join us on Tuesdays at noon on Studio A. With Tammy's guidance, you'll find out who has been watching over you from the other side, and soon you will be talking with your angels.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And I'm Jan Kira-Lessin with my co-host Dr. Sasha Lessin, and we're interviewing our very special guest, Andrew-d-Basiago. But before we get back to our show, I want to remind everybody to please go over to that donation button on freedomslips.com and donate what you can, $1, 10, 15, 20, 5, whatever you can donate is greatly appreciated. And we do thank you very much for your donation. And before we go back, Andy has a request. We're going to go on to the presidents. What was that one called? The presidents. That one's very interesting.
Yeah,
Sasha,
my next.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, Sasha wants to say something.
Sure.
Oh no, he's fine. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I think the proposal you're referring to is very high up in the truth section. That's where I'm calling on the president, whether it's myself or whoever is elected in 2016, to go to Presidents Bush, Clinton, Bush, and Obama and have them admit the fact that as a result of America developing a time travel capability in the early 1970s, they were apprised years in advance, literally decades in advance, of their destinies as President of the United States. Let me describe why I know that, how I know that. When I was serving on Project Pegasus as a child, and usually we were having lunch and dinner with individuals like Dr. Harold Agnew when he was the director of the Los Alamos National Labs, Dr. Ivan Browning when he was director of science and technology for the CIA, and the project engineers from Parsons, including my late father, a man by the name of Joseph Conason, and whatever respected guests were in Albuquerque at that time. I remember one time I was at a lunch. I believe that Senator Dennis Chavez was present, the cousin of Connie Chavez, who was somebody working and performing tasks for my father in furtherance of the project. There were several special lunches. One of the special lunches included about 30 project people in a Mexican restaurant in Albuquerque, with George H.W. Bush, his wife Barbara Bush, and their son George W. Bush present as distinguished guests. And this was around the time that Bush was running for the House in Texas. We're talking 1970, 71. He was not yet director of the CIA, and he had not yet been ambassador to China. And at that luncheon, George W. Bush, I was about 9, W was about 24, was all over that restaurant joking, "Have you heard my daddy and I are going to be president?" So the Bushes had just been apprised of the fact from Project Pegasus that they were destined to be president. At another meeting that just included a young Bill Clinton, and in addition to Clinton and I, Dr. Agnew, Dr. Browning, my father, and Mr. Conason, this is a direct quote. Bill Clinton said, "You know, fellas, I know that you all work for the atomic research community, and I know that you're always doing amazing things like building more destructive nuclear weapons. But I have to tell you, some days I get up and I have to pinch myself and say, me, Bill Clinton, president? I mean, fellas, that dog don't hunt." Okay, he was sitting right next to me. I saved your listenership my Bush and Clinton vocal imitations, but that's what they said. So here we have a situation where, we're talking about these two future presidents. In fact, they followed each other in office, being apprised of their presidencies when they were still college age. And then, of course, Barack Obama served in the Mars Jumper program with me, and both his presidency and my presidency was being discussed openly. Were being discussed openly, and we were college age. Okay, just as Bush and Clinton, Bush Jr. and Clinton had been when I met them. So this is a deep political secret. It's one of the most insidious and protected secrets that the U.S. government has been keeping. People have been killed to keep it. Certainly the Clinton kill count may be explained in terms of people that the Clintons inadvertently let slip that they knew that they were going to at least enjoy a Bill Clinton presidency, perhaps a Hillary Clinton presidency. And the only reason I'll be real honest here with your listeners, the only reason I was not assassinated for this when I began revealing it is I had already been on the radio about 100 times when I revealed it, and 10 or 15 TV shows. I revealed this very late in my Truth campaign because it is one of the most closely held and zealously defended state secrets. The American people, I believe, have a right to know, as citizens of a constitutional republic, whose constitution provides for the election of a president and describes under Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5, what the eligibility requirements for that office are. They have a right to know that the way in which they select their chief executive has been disrupted, has been disturbed by the U.S. intelligence community developing quantum access based on America inventing and acquiring time travel technology, so that in 1970 we had 8 different modalities of time travel, running the gamut from remote viewing with very gifted psychics on the far left side of the spectrum, the area of the rudimentary technologies, all the way through 4 different ways of sending somebody physically to a past or future event. And while there was a bias in government not to play God and quantum engineer the future based on prior knowledge of it, there was a decision to apprise future presidents of their destiny so they could psychologically deal with the office. You may recall that I'd been quoting it incorrectly. I had been saying that when Harry Truman learned that Franklin Roosevelt had died and that he himself was going to become president of the United States, he said, I felt that I was saying in an interview that he said that I felt at that moment that the whole weight of the world had been put on my shoulders. I researched that quote, and actually what Harry S. Truman of Missouri said, the then vice president when Franklin Roosevelt died in April of 1945, he actually said, I felt that the weight of the stars in the heavens had been placed on my shoulders.
Oh, wow.
He said, I felt that the weight of the planets and the stars in the heavens had been placed on my shoulders. Okay,
Wow.
in other words, he felt the universe collapsing on his head. Okay, so I think that because of the profound psychological stress of being president, that they made this decision that it would be better to know than not know whether you were destined to be president. Now, I don't know whether they're dealing with timeline issues, and they've been apprising, 20 people born in every birth year or something, hey, look, you're going to be president, because it really doesn't matter if it doesn't come true, right? Like it won't matter if I don't win, right? But I was apprised by my father and Courtney Hunt of the CIA, both career CIA consultants who are in the CIA employee database as deceased officers. So Obama was told.
Well, I wonder.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
It seems obvious that if you have the power to see what's going to occur in the future, and you can go back to the past, you could alter the future by, killing somebody in the past, that kind of thing. Is that a fallacy, or?
Well, that's actually the grandfather paradox writ in and projected towards the future. The reason that that's not true is that whenever you sample the future by sending somebody there, or let's say propagating a remote hologram of the future with a chronovisor, so you can look at it as a looking glass, as it were, the future that you examine is the result of the net of causal factors that lead up to it. The future at any given time is the sum total of all net causes. So if you killed somebody in the present because you thought they were going to be president and you objected to it, you wouldn't pick them up in your sampling of the future. That's the paradox. That's not just like if you're alive to go back to the past to kill your mother so you're never born, you must never succeed at it because you were born to make the attempt.
Right.
So in a similar way, if somebody had, let's say, identified one of the presidents that we've already had via time travel and then decided to eliminate them, if they had succeeded, we wouldn't have had that president. But the additional paradox is, if they had succeeded, they never would have sawn that. They would have never had any intelligence seeing or indicating that person is going to be president. So how have a motive in the present to eliminate that person? It gets into a very get smart kind of rendering of time travel at that point.
I love it.
Yeah.
So, who was the first? I wonder how far this goes back, because we had the Philadelphia experiment playing with time, and there's indications that they've had time stuff. I wonder who was the first president they saw.
Well, I'm one of the only people on Earth who can answer that question, at least who currently does not have a security clearance and can speak openly. In fact, I was a child when I swore that oath, so children can't contract, so I'm under no contractual duty not to reveal this. We know that the first was at least the knowledge of the destiny of a president, the first destiny of a president to be known, not necessarily as being as president, but his resignation was that the resignation of Richard Nixon was known by the CIA via quantum access in 1973, around the time that the story was just breaking. The story of the break-in at the Watergate Hotel was just breaking. Because I walked behind two CIA agents in Albuquerque, and one was saying to the other, we've determined that Nixon gets embroiled in a scandal called Watergate and is forced to resign the presidency. And the other one just said, oh, Christ, and kind of slid over on the bar. Because they were all Nixon Republicans in the project. Time travel was an accomplishment of Richard Nixon's secret team. And so we also know that Jimmy Carter's identity was detected because a statement by Jimmy Carter appears in the frontis papers of Alfred Lambermont Weber's book Exopolitics, which I edited. And at the time in 1971, when they had detected that I was going to be the principal whistleblower on the project, a sidebar activity of Project Pegasus began, where they began investigating me. So, for example, my father that summer, in the second half of 1971, was taking me over to Sandia, and some ETs that work there, the ETs with the more human-like noses, the proboscis ones that were part of the Holloman Air Force Base incident of the ETs with noses, they were utilizing this device like a motion picture projector to project holograms of my future into a darkened room. And my father was going through with me, trying to use my psychic ability to determine. He was asking me, well, who's this person, or what do you get from this person? And he was going through my future, trying to determine why I was motivated in the future to break project secrecy, to violate project secrecy, and become the principal whistleblower of Project Pegasus and the U.S. achievement of time travel. And one of those activities was obtaining books that I would write and edit in the future. So when I was on the project as a kid that summer, they had, for example, my memoir of my project experiences that I'm still writing and will hope to be publishing soon. And among the other books they had was Alfred's book, Exopolitics. And so there was a discussion of the Jimmy Carter presidency. So we know they knew about the Nixon resignation, but also Presidents Carter, Bush, Clinton, Bush, and Obama. What I have incomplete data on is whether they knew about the presidencies of Reagan and Ford. And I believe that they knew about both, because we know that they tried to take those presidents out with assassination very quickly. We know, for example, that Ronald Reagan was shot on March 30th of 1981, about 70 days after being sworn in on January 20th of 1981. And we now know that there was a second gunman present that actually fired the shot that lodged near President Reagan's heart. It was fired.
Wow.
It was fired not by John Warnock Hinckley, but by an unnamed individual firing from a window, either of the hotel or of an adjacent office building. So the Reagan assassination looked like it was planned. Why? Because Ronald Reagan was an independent president, even though he'd won the Republican nomination, who had his own power base and own financial base in California, and was going to take the country in the direction that he wanted, rather than the elite secret societies and so forth and the people who run our society wanted. So it's in all likelihood they had prior knowledge of the Reagan presidency, because the assassination was a conspiracy and it was implemented very quickly after he was sworn in as president in January of 1981.
Andy, I'm going to propose a speculation that you haven't been assassinated, that you are being allowed to and encouraged to and programmed to be a whistleblower. I have astronauts that have the same kind of awakening, saying, I have been moved to start to break the truth to humanity. And I think that you've been chosen in that way. It's not an accident. That's what I think.
Well, it's more complex than that. It'd probably take a whole show to explain. But Dr. Michael Salla has suggested that I was being groomed to be a generational whistleblower. And I want to make it clear that there was an attempt to do that, in the sense that once my father and his longtime companion in New Mexico, Connie Chavez, a woman that he had hoped to propose marriage to at one time, but she decided to marry somebody else, her high school boyfriend. They met very young. They met when they were in their 20s. So they were sort of a team in New Mexico working on classified defense projects beginning in 1953, 8 years before my birth. What I'd like to describe here is that they were working to educate me about everything that Project Pegasus was doing. And I was exposed to everything the project was doing in time travel, to all 8 modalities. And the structure, the function, the effects, the provenance of those technologies were explained to me. Because once they determined I was going to be the principal whistleblower on the project, and then once it was discovered that I was a future president, they made every effort to use me as sort of a generational later disclosure of the project. But that wasn't the design of the government. They were acting in opposition to the plan that the U.S. government had arrived at, involving keeping time travel secret and utilizing, for example, Tesla teleportation to as a way to allow the military to storm battlefronts without casualties, rather than to introduce it into the civilian sector. So actually, the effort that was made to expose me to everything that Project Pegasus was doing, so I would have a complete understanding of where the U.S. time travel capability was in 1970. That was a gift to the American people that came through my father, Raymond F. Basiago, his friend, Mary Constance Chavez, born 1928, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and other people in Parsons and in the civilian sector who opposed the decision that had been made by Donald Rumsfeld and others, Rumsfeld being the defense attaché to Project Pegasus, who later became defense secretary under Presidents Gerald Ford and George W. Bush, and who has served more years as defense secretary of any of our post-war war secretaries or defense secretaries. So, yes, there was an effort not so much to groom me, because the education I got in Pegasus was to time travel, and the education I got in the jump room program was to go to Mars. But I received the education itself, which I've been able to apply in my law career, in my political career, in my career as a whistleblower. And I definitely was groomed in the sense I was put through some hellaciously stressful experiences as a school child and as a college student. But I want to make it clear that I'm not the product of some longitudinal effort by the government itself to create a whistleblower. I'm simply not. I'm not some kind of Manchurian candidate. I stepped forward of my own free will and accord after I had a bit of a period of difficulty in my career, and I had a little bit of extra time, and I was able to look back and in my late 30s and begin evaluating what I had been part of. And that led me to ultimately bring the information forward effectively in media. But I am not the product of some government attempt to do that, but I did receive help from my father and several others in terms of them exposing me to things that they then knew I would bring public as a whistleblower.
What I'm suggesting, Andy, is that it's a synchronicity that beyond a government programming you, but I think it's part of divine plan.
Oh, yes,
plans of higher beings that have selected you to be the person, and even made it so that you have these mentors, the white hats within the government, that want to see the spirit of American democracy actualized through you and what you have to offer.
Yes, I appreciate what you're saying now. I thought you were saying something else. Yes, I believe that divine providence has been involved. For example, at the time that they were putting Barack Obama during his college years with another Mars jumper, stressing us out by sending us to another planet and dealing with that, really just overwhelming kind of dread and fear and stress, kind of as stressful as it would be to be president of the United States during a crisis. At the time that they were putting Obama with Jimmy Carter's national security advisors, Professor Zbigniew Brzezinski at Columbia, they were putting me with one of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's speechwriters and aides at UCLA, and that was the late Norman Cousins. So if that wasn't government intention there in isolating Barack and I, identifying Barack and I as presidents, and putting us with several of the, or with one of the primary intellectuals of a generation, that did clearly involve some kind of divine providence, because Norman was a phenomenal American. He was one of the most profound thinkers of his generation. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of world history and of American history. He wrote a dozen just incredibly powerful books, including those about, for example, one of his later works was The Pathology of Power, in which he described how the nuclear arms race had distorted America's mission in the world from the time of the Enlightenment. And so, yes, I think that higher level intelligences may have been involved in selecting me for this role in the same way that everybody is selected for a destiny, the destiny that they're supposed to live. And so I definitely feel I'm on point. I definitely feel that I'm fulfilling my intended destiny by running for president.
Oh,
I have a question.
And bringing this information forward as a figure in the truth movement.
Mm-hmm.
And you're doing an incredible job. In this proposal about admitting how time travel affected the presidency, imagine that you are the president, and you say in this proposal that the president should ask Presidents Bush, Clinton, wish Obama to tell the truth to the American people and admit that they were given foreknowledge of their presidencies. How would you do that, Mr. President? How would you go about and ask these former presidents?
I would invite them up to lunch at the White House, and I would stand. I would stand up and I would do a little chat worthy of Theodore Roosevelt, and I would ask them to their faces. I wouldn't send them a letter. I wouldn't make a phone call. I wouldn't send them an email. I wouldn't send something through an aide. This is so momentous. This would be such potentially damaging to their historical reputations that after learning decades in advance that they were destined to be president, they decided to conceal that information to secure their electoral advantage and inevitability. That I would only ask them in person, and I would include President Carter. I would include the living president, so I would include President Carter's and George H.W. Bush, although they're both in their 90s now, and then George W. Bush, Clinton, and Obama, because, look, this goes to the heart of the legitimacy of the presidency. These individuals have concealed prior knowledge of their presidencies. And when this is generally known and explained, and when I get into office and I disclose even more information like practical teleportation, the passages about this in my books and the tape-recorded statements that now exist in over 100 radio interviews, some of them which address this particular issue, are going to become widespread public knowledge. You know, in the same way that people know that an Illuminati exists, the Illuminati is actually a club of sick people who compete to do depraved acts. It's not the corporate elite or anything else that people think it is. It's actually a specific pathological club. But now the Illuminati has become a household word, where it had just been introduced by esoteric researchers like Anthony Hilder or Chris Everard or Jay Widener. Now every high school student has heard of the Illuminati. In 10 years, every high school student will be aware of the fact that the post-war presidents after Nixon received prior knowledge of their presidencies and chose not to reveal it. So hopefully, God willing, they will all still be alive when I'm sworn in January of next year, and I will give them the opportunity to come forward rather than continue to reveal this.
Okay.
I wish them the best. Because
I do.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. In this particular part of your program, you wish them the best, but then I remember a little further down in the truth, you have something to deal with the war crimes that some of them perpetrated. It's part of the truth.
Where do you want to go next?
Yeah.
With
Actually, we struck that. We struck that because I want to get in depleted uranium, and we decided to strike the prosecution of Bush and Obama for war crimes because we felt it was more positive and it would enable me to get elected. But it wasn't based on electoral calculation primarily. It was primarily based on the idea that it would be better to move forward with a truly defensive defense policy than with a Nuremberg-like prosecution of George W. Bush and Barack Obama for war crimes. But I will be commenting on their war crimes. For example, the duplicity of Secretary of State Clinton and President Obama for sponsoring ISIS, which created war crimes in the immolation death of the Jordanian pilot and committed crimes against humanity for beheading Christians for their religion. So Clinton and Obama, that is Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, have vicarious liability for the war crimes and the crimes against humanity that have been perpetrated by ISIS. If an international movement is begun to prosecute them for war crimes and crimes against humanity, I will obstruct those prosecutions. But I don't want to state that my administration will try the last two presidents, because I want to move forward on a positive footing, that what we need is to introduce a truly defensive defense policy in which America only uses military might to protect the American homeland from attack and invasion, to make possible the legitimate exercises of our activities overseas, like moving our goods in international commerce, and to police and eliminate, to basically shut down countries and groups that are violating generalized norms of human decency by committing, for example, genocide, slavery, torture, and piracy on the high seas. But I want to move forward on a positive agenda. And this was something that we used to kind of, excuse me, to evaluate my entire proposals. I want to lead on truth, reform, and innovation, not truth, vindication, reform, backward-lookingness, innovation, and hostility. Okay.
Can I follow up on that? Would you continue to keep the United States from joining the International Tribune of War Crimes in The Hague? Right now, Americans can't be tried by that court, and yet I can see how trying some of these war criminals wouldn't be looking forward, and yet we do need some kind of international law.
I would support that, and I do support that. I'm simply saying that I didn't want to make one of my proposals, the war crimes trial of the last two presidents, because, among other things, practically speaking, doing so would potentially prevent me from becoming president, just because it would discourage Republicans and Democrats for voting for an independent candidate like myself. But since we were ultimately deciding to keep in or eliminate proposals based on principle, the principle involved is that I want all of the proposals to be forward-looking. But that doesn't mean that I don't support or I would not welcome U.S. joining the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague and commenting on war crimes tribunals of American leaders that would be launched and would even endorse the prosecution, for example, of President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton for the vicarious liability that they have in the founding of ISIS. I'm just saying that I didn't want to make it one of my proposals.
Understood. Thank you.
Which proposal would you like to cover next?
Well, a major thing that I want to accomplish, I would consider myself a successful president if after my first term in 2025, looking at the 2024 election, if I had been successful in establishing a permanent truth process in government itself. Right now, I think the lessons of Watergate, the Iran-Contra scandal, and, for example, the cover-up of cancer deaths by the tobacco industry that Jeffrey Wigand was the whistleblower on, we've tended to rely for the truth about the way the world is really working. As a result of the brave acts of investigative journalists, isolated members of Congress, and isolated and few and far between whistleblowers, people of the caliber of Julian Assange and Edward Snowden, who I admire greatly and who I would pardon as president and give the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And in fact, the Presidential Medal of Freedom for the American citizen Edward Snowden is one of my proposals. I would pardon both Assange and Snowden, and for that matter, Manning, for their whistleblowing. I think that they served the interests of the American people greatly by being whistleblowers. But we need more than that. We need, in my view, a Senate Truth Commission. That would be a permanent, standing, truth-seeking commission before which former members of the executive branch, the intelligence community, and the U.S. military could appear to reveal secret information and do so with immunity from prosecution. People often ask me about that time on Coast to Coast AM when Ed Dames, who was our teacher in the Mars Jump Room program, called in and ambushed me and stated that I was lying and that he was not our instructor, even though I and my fellow jumpers, William B. Stillings and Bernard Mendez, all still testify to the truth of the matter that Ed Dames was our Mars training officer. Well, Ed had to do that. Why? Because if he admits his involvement while serving in the active duty U.S. Army training us to go to Mars, he could be prosecuted under JANAP 146E for violating a secrecy oath, lose his military pension, be fined $10,000, and spend as many as 10 years in Leavenworth Prison, the U.S. Army prison in Kansas. So this is the world we're living in which people who have signed loyalty and secrecy agreements while serving as officers in the United States military cannot support the claims of whistleblowers like myself. Ed Dames was virtually compelled to place that call because the cat was out of the bag, the genie was out of the bottle, and I was revealing that as per his secrecy oath, he has concealed all these years that he's been promoting his remote viewing work and talking about the kill shot from the sun and these other future disasters that he's been alleging are going to occur. He has concealed his involvement as a facilitator in Project Pegasus, for example, where he worked with me in the Montauk Chair in New Mexico, and as an educator in the Mars Jump Room program, and as somebody who probably took the jump to Mars himself, because he said one time during our instruction that everybody in the program has to jump to Mars at least once. So that's the world we're living in one in which former executive branch intelligence and military personnel like an Ed Dames, somebody who was serving in both the intelligence community and the military when he was training us to go to Mars, because he was a scientific and technical intelligence officer for the U.S. Army. I mean, that pretty much takes the cake right there. They can't speak out, and they can't even confirm what they did unless they're compelled under subpoena, and often they take the fifth in open federal district court actions and only will reveal what they did, let's say, in our FISA courts, which are secret intelligence courts, because they're compelled to by federal law not to talk.
Can you, as president, forgive them if this secret court finds them guilty? Can you say, in view of the service of your whistleblowing, I pardon you?
Yes, actually, you've cited what would be a policy under my effort to create a truth process in government. I would do just that. What would happen was, let's say they would testify in open court or an open Senate testimony about something that they were compelled to keep a military secret, but which in the opinion of, let's say, the judge or the chair of the Senate Truth Commission or whatever Senate commission they're testifying before, wouldn't violate the two standards that justify secrecy, either the violation of personal or group privacy or where the revelation of the information would create a clear and present danger of immediate irreparable harm. If we assume arguendo that the information would present none of those, like let's say the secret fact that all U.S. military ordnance over a certain size has been equipped with depleted uranium to bring about population reduction in the military theater of our wars, they would be, if they said it in open court and violated their military secrecy oath, I would then begin the tradition of granting them a complete and unconditional pardon for doing so. So they would avoid the imposition of JANEP 146E for serving a higher standard than secrecy, which is the right that the American people have to get truth from their government.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Wow.
Yeah, so that would be part of the general regime of the truth presidency I would lead. That would mark a change, where I would actually tell them and their lawyers, even consulting with them in the Oval Office, go forward with that testimony before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, before the House Armed Services Committee on Tuesday. And if you do, you have my word of honor that I will pardon you. I would begin doing that to bring forward what's been concealed. Do most Americans know that I think it's all ordnance over 50 millimeters in the U.S. arsenal is now equipped with depleted uranium, strictly for the purpose of not killing enemy combatants, but for bringing about population reduction in the theater of the war. That is...
Well, that's a war crime. That's a war crime.
Well, it's actually a crime against humanity because it's genocide.
Mm-hmm.
So it's worse than a war crime, but it's also that, yes. It certainly violates the thrust of the Geneva Convention of military force only being used in battle, and then, for example, you can't execute a POW. So why this knock-on effect of causing that country to give birth to babies with gross teratogenic birth defects by putting depleted uranium, by putting DU in our military ordnance? And let me say this: if she never wins the Nobel Peace Prize, I would certainly bestow upon the courageous friend of ours and of humanity, Lorraine Murray, the presidential freedom for bringing this information forward as an anti-radiation activist. I mean, this is the plague of thieves. It's radiation, and we are spreading it now that we have not had very much nuclear testing since the early 90s. We are still spreading depleted uranium around the world, and the United States should not embody the plague of thieves. We should be saving the world from the plague of thieves that ionizing radiation is.
Wow. Are you familiar with the technology
that is something that
could... How would you clean up the radiation that's been accumulating from the tests, from the bombs from Fukushima and Chernobyl?
That's a proposal in my innovation section, which is, in light of the fact that our defense plants have been leaking radiation for the entire time, the 72 years now since the Trinity blast, since the development of the first atomic weapons, so that the average American has twice the incidence of diseases of civilization like diabetes, heart disease, and cancer than the average Mexican national. We have needed for decades a way to counter ionizing radiation. Now that we have Fukushima actively destroying life as we have known it in the Pacific, marine life as we have known it in the Pacific, and is impacting the American homeland with ionizing radiation, as president, I would launch a crash course, and this is one of my 100 proposals, to find a way to ameliorate ionizing radiation, to find a technical solution to the problem of radiation. And we need that for Fukushima. We need it for our defense plants. Rocky Flats in Colorado has been leaking for years. The atomic waste that is sitting in large container units, supposedly container units, in Hanford, Washington, near Richland, Washington, has been gradually percolating through the aquifers there and leaking into the Columbia River.
Oh, whoa!
And so while there have been solutions presented to place our radioactive waste from nuclear energy, from atomic energy, in deep locations underground, we have not resolved Fukushima, and we have not resolved the dispersion of ionizing radiation throughout our country as a result of the defense plants, and it is killing the American people, and the American people have a right to know. In fact, somebody suggested that my presidency may actually be contingent on this particular secret becoming widely known, that the Defense Department has been killing us with radiation. And I mean that literally.
Yeah.
And I use the example of the fact that we have half the incident. I mean, we have twice the incidence of the diseases of civilization that Mexico has per capita.
I was on Johnson Atoll in '95 and '96, and we had to carry a gas mask around with us because we were doing this type of disposal of chemical weapons and other things like that. And at that time, I learned that they were doing the similar things, not just the nuclear, but chemicals. They're storing mass amounts of chemicals that could just start leaking. And we were given like 5 seconds to get our kit out and shoot ourselves in the hip so we wouldn't die from exposure. So, that could just be a story. Who knows? That's what they were telling us. So we worked on that island. So this is not just the stuff depleting into the water, but they could just unleash into the air and kill hundreds of thousands and millions of people just like that. So it is a big problem, and we need to investigate all this.
Yes, I also call for a moratorium on nuclear energy around the world. Literally not a permanent moratorium, but a temporary universal moratorium on nuclear power plants, because what Fukushima also shows, not only that we're being impacted by ionizing radiation from the West, but that the average nuclear power plant around the world only has 3.5 weeks of diesel fuel to power its cooling system. So if we had something like an EMP event from an asteroid striking the ionosphere, or a nuclear bomb being blown up high in the sky above, let's say, Kansas, as George Norrie has been championing the resolution of, and by the way, equipping our electric grid to ameliorate and prevent an EMP event from putting us back to a 1776 level of existence is one of my proposals. But if we had such an event, accidental, natural, or as a result of a military attack by a foreign country or terrorist group, essentially the thousands and thousands of nuclear plants around the world, if we had a blackout internationally, would all run out of diesel fuel in fewer than 4 weeks. So then in every country where there were nuclear plants, the nightly news coverage would be, more trucks with diesel fuel were driven to the San Onofre nuclear plant today to prevent the China syndrome from occurring on the central coast of California. That's what the world news would look like. And then the question would become, how do you deactivate those plants by continually sending diesel fuel there until you get the electrical grid back up? So we would be in a crisis of unprecedented proportion, where if we had a mass China syndrome like that, it would probably literally mutilate the human genome, and we might be at risk of extinction as a species, resulting from the impact on our reproductive cells from all of that radiation that would then encircle the planet if we had a mass China syndrome event. We don't want Fukushima written 2,000 times over. We want to have a moratorium on nuclear power until we equip the nuclear plants with a way to be perpetually energized and perpetually cool that is not dependent on immediate electricity from the grid or from diesel fuel.
Andy, we're running out of time. We only have about 15 minutes. I do want to cover, my favorite one is revealing the ET presence on Earth. And actually, Hillary is touching on that. She just has another Jimmy Kimmel interview where she says that I will definitely get behind Area 51 and the extraterrestrial presence. Tell us about what your proposal means.
Well, I was very flattered. I was very flattered, or I received the gratitude of the truth community, in a sense, the paranormal community, from Mrs. Clinton, in the sense that she made that statement, because I think she was being responsive to my campaign. Because, I've led with the truth, and I've been calling for an end of the ET cover-up for years. But what I would do as president is say, I would literally give a televised address telling the American people such things as the number and types of ET species that are visiting Earth, what the hidden history of the U.S. government's interaction with the ET visitors has been, and what has been the nature and extent of any ET human liaison projects that resulted from contact. I know from my own experiences on Project Pegasus that there are tall grays that are guests of the United States government that are living in some of the deep underground military bases beneath New Mexico. And I remember discussing their presence with my father, and at that time, in the early 70s, the U.S. government didn't know who these ETs were, where they were from, or what they wanted. All they knew is that they were here, and they were interested in us, and they were interested in our children and what our evolutionary path in the future would be. And that's why a meeting was held between two of the tall grays, a husband and wife, and myself and one of the other boys in the program. We had a kind of a staged conversation with them, a kind of a summit meeting where we asked them these slow-pitch questions. Okay, so this is the world we have actually been living in for almost 50 years, one in which ET guests of the United States government have been in contact with some of our gifted and talented school children, but people are still debating whether or not we're being visited. Look, there was a space physics textbook that was used to teach pilots at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado in the late 1970s that revealed that 57 different ET species were visiting our planet. And when I was on Child on Pegasus, I also attended a lecture in which the four most common ET visitors were described, even with drawings. And they are the tall grays, the small grays, the reptilians, and the Nordics. And what do you know? The Honorable Paul T. Hellyer, as a whistleblower, has revealed that when he was the defense minister of Canada in the early 1970s, he received the same briefing. So in the ET area, both my experiences as a kid on Pegasus and the man who was serving as defense minister of all of Canada at that time received the same briefing. So I can say from personal experience in contact with ET that ET is here, and it's high time that the U.S. government revealed that to the American people. I believe that people can deal with the truth, unlike George H.W. Bush recently stated. I believe that we have familiarized ourselves with the concept that our universe is inhabited. We have been familiarized with some of the, from our perspective, the peculiar appearance of some of the advanced extraterrestrials, and we should simply move forward and express true leadership from the presidency of our country and have the president give a televised address about the ET situation.
What about the experiencers, those that are getting contact? Right now they're being ridiculed and shamed, and they're experiencing extreme discrimination just like minorities have in the past. And if there's some way to address their information, I know that Free and the Edgar Mitchell, that website that they have, that group, they've been researching it, and the stats are coming out now as a result of all the surveys. And they said the number one species that they are encountering are humanoids. They're very human looking. And so literally ETs are walking among us. Probably.
Yes. Well, the analogy I would make in government is that, being in an interracial couple was once against the law in many states of the Union. And it wasn't until the Loving v. Virginia decision of the Supreme Court in 1967 that we recognized that it should be lawful to take as one's marital partner or partner otherwise somebody of a quote-unquote different race. I like to use the term different ethnicity because there's only one race, the human race. So look what happened. The Supreme Court made it was given a dirty name. It was called miscegenation, as if taking a partner from a different ethnic group with a different skin color somehow was a misallocation of your genetic potential. Okay, and when miscegenation was eliminated as a concept, when being in an interracial couple was made lawful in 1967, what followed was people having the freedom to be in an interracial couple. And in the same way, look, when the President of the United States gives a televised address from the Oval Office revealing the fact that the ETs have been here for thousands of years and that their presence here accelerated after we started detonating atomic weapons, which the revelation of is another one of my proposals. And when we describe that literally the 1 billion people who have described the alien abduction experience, literally 1 out of every 7 Earthlings has described some form of extraterrestrial contact, we estimate, or has had such. When we begin speaking openly about that, then people will have the freedom to be themselves and not have government reinforce the social persecution by which they are unjustly targeted. Instead, just as being an interracial couple became normal and lawful, when we make the ET presence something that the president himself has revealed, then those individuals who've been courageous enough to talk about their contact experiences will no longer be the targets of social discrimination.
That's wonderful. Actually, a lot of the abductees, contactees are stating that they are able to copulate and reproduce. It's not just cloning and genetic intervention. So they are, at least some of them are the same species because they're able to breed physically and reproduce.
Yes, and we have relatives out there. I mean, the Homo martis terris human typology on Mars that I interacted with actually when they were visiting Earth. I never saw one on Mars. But they are the descendants of our ancestors who were left on Mars during the solar system catastrophe of 11,500 BCE. So we literally have cousins on Mars. So yes, your point is well taken. If life was planted here, if the doctrine of, or the theory of panspermia is true, and human life was planted here or genetically engineered here in stages by extraterrestrials, then that implies that we have cousins of a different nature off planet, namely our progenitors.
The other thing that's come out in the free studies is that the contact is overall, in a vast majority of cases, ameliorative, positive for the individual and positive for humanity, and that the negative cases tend to be selected by negative therapists who hypnotize people to share their negative experiences.
Yes, and that's an important reason why. You look, if America was supposed to be the fulfillment of the Enlightenment, and the goal of our Republican form of government was to create a democracy in which people could fulfill their human potential, then declassifying the truth about the extraterrestrial situation will open up and legitimize a whole area of human personal and academic inquiry, so that the positive nature of contact is known and is something that can be built upon. I mean, all of my contacts in childhood with ET were either neutral or positive. And now there's those who say, well, look, there have been some mutilations that have been carried out by ETs and so forth. But the bottom line is that the literature actually shows that while the ET species that have been visiting us have often used stealth as if upholding the prime directive of Star Trek to not interfere in the developments of a developing civilization, by and large, there seems to have been at least neutrality and very often positive events that have resulted from contact, such as people developing a greater respect for the environment, and things that the late Dr. John Mack talked about in his book Abduction, how many contactees develop a high level of creativity or special abilities, or a reverence for life and a reverence for the environment. These are all good things that have resulted from ET contact, and so I think that it would be a good thing for the president to speak from the Oval Office and reveal the ET presence, because then the predominantly positive nature of the experience would be emphasized rather than fear and paranoia controlling.
Well, the other aspect is they use the ET contact experience, and they do My Labs type things, and they are very negative. So if this is exposed across the board, we can start to prevent these negative abduction experiences by the military and other people that are, posing as extraterrestrials.
Right, so I could note those offenses in the speech. So we could just do a very intelligent speech that would be broadly cabined to address the entire subject, to create a context in which these views have been legitimized. The remarkable thing about the American people and the American nation is that in the absence of presidential leadership in this area, the American people undertook their own process of self-education. And I think the spirit of Philadelphia is really in all of those lecture halls where all of those brave experiencers and academics who have focused on this subject have really fulfilled the meaning of the First Amendment right to freedom of speech and press and assembly by carrying out and creating the fields of ufology and exopolitics in absence of government leadership in this area. We still ended up leading ourselves to a world in which the average high school student knows a lot about ET, whereas we didn't necessarily when we were in high school, unless we were contactees.
I was also delighted to see in your platform that you protection for Sasquatch. I recently saw something on the internet where some hunters shot a man thinking he was a Sasquatch. He was very sad that it was a man, not a Sasquatch. Well, I think that's disgusting. And I'm glad to see that you would protect Sasquatch.
Yeah, well, that's a very personal issue for me, because when I was just about old enough to go by myself to the restroom at Lake Sacandaga in the Adirondack mountain range, when I was camping with my family in 1966, I was just about 5 years old. I walked over to the outhouse, and there was an adult male Sasquatch and a young male Sasquatch that must have been his son, who were standing next to the outhouse, and I asked them, do you want to go in? And they just looked at me, and then I went in and did my business and came out, and they were standing looking at the door of the outhouse. And as I walked out the door of the outhouse down onto the ground, the adult Sasquatch indicated with his right hand, he sort of thrust his palm upward towards his son as if to say to me, this is my son, he's your age, you should play with him when you're here. I then walked around his son, and these two type 2 Sasquatch, the ones that look very human but have hair all over their bodies, retreated into the tall grass, and I guess from there up into the woods rather than up into the shore of Lake Sacandaga. But so I'm someone who encountered Sasquatch, and in fact, I'm the first presidential aspirant since Theodore Roosevelt to have acknowledged publicly that I had a contact with Sasquatch. Theodore Roosevelt had a Sasquatch encounter when he was looking for Sasquatch. He was on his so-called Great North American Ape Expedition, and a member of his party went into the woods to urinate by starlight when they had a campfire roaring. And as he was walking back towards the campfire, where all of their fellow explorers were sitting, he accidentally startled a Sasquatch into the encampment. So President Theodore Roosevelt was a Sasquatch contactee. And here we are still making documentaries for the History Channel as to whether or not Sasquatch exists. So again, this is one of the areas that we need to bring forward. Secondarily, I've been motivated by the very important findings made by the courageous Dr. Melba Ketchum in a study that was sponsored by the equally brave David Paulides, in which Dr. Ketchum, a geneticist, ended up finding with known Sasquatch samples of hair and so forth, that Sasquatch has matrilineal DNA. That's the mitochondrial DNA that largely determines personality, that is of modern Homo sapiens, of us. But patrilineal DNA, that's the DNA from the father, that is from an unknown primate. So when I read those stories about people shooting baby Sasquatches, I thought, wait a minute, these are primates that are half human. They have our matrilineal DNA. So it's wrong to be considering them wild animals that can be shot to death in the woods. So I'm calling for the next president, or I would as president, in fact, put the Sasquatch on the endangered species list so they can't be legally taken in that matter. They can't be legally killed or attacked. Only with protection under the ESA will the law follow natural history, the fact that the Sasquatch are apparently a subspecies of our own species.
It's even more complex than that in a way. Sitchin, whom I studied with, basically says that the primate ancestor of Sasquatch, Homo erectus, genes were taken, mitochondrial genes particularly, were taken from Homo erectus and introduced into a series of clones and then reproductively able beings to create an adaptation of the Nibiran genome, and so we are partially Sasquatch, just as they are partially us.
And that's why they have stories that they were able to breed with a Sasquatch in Russia, and she had children by human males.
Xana, yeah.
Yeah. We're almost out of time. We got 1 minute. Andy, how can people? We've got 2 minutes. Tell us a little bit about how people.
Oh, the write-in, yes.
And the write-in candidacy.
I'm running a write-in candidacy as an independent, which is permitted in 43 of the 50 states. The states that don't allow it, unfortunately, because I know you two are supporters, Hawaii, South Dakota, Nevada, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi don't allow write-ins. The other 43 states do. 37 of them require registration. So beginning tomorrow, my core group of team members is going to be contacting all the states and fulfilling the filing requirements to have write-in votes for me counted, which is not publicized at all. We thought write-ins were available in the 43 states, but in 37 of them, we're actually still going to have to get a form of ballot access. So those would like
Andy, we're out of time. Go ahead.
So please visit andy2016.com/donate.
All right, Andy. Much love to you. Thank you so much, listeners, for joining us.
Aloha.
Aloha.